It's been about a month and a half since Joker Fully Ado released, which in internet terms is about a year and a half. So I kind of figured it'd be an interesting venture to have a little bit of a retrospective. You know, just a reasonable, mature, and constructive analysis to try and figure out
what in the hell was that all about?
At first I was pretty hyped on this movie, because I absolutely loved the first one, and the second one had a really solid trailer. I know most people wrote it off pretty outright because it was a musical, but I'm straight enough to admit I love musicals. So I didn't mind as long as the awesome character of Arthur Fleck was expounded upon and the movie didn't outright suck balls. Then the reviews came out, and it was pretty clear this movie sucked big balls. But to be honest, it wasn't really clear why it sucked big balls. I think the main critique I was hearing is that it was pretty damn boring and unimaginative, which to be honest, is pretty much the worst two strikes a movie sequel can receive. But since that was essentially all I heard, I wasn't really that hesitant to watch it, because I wasn't really afraid of the second movie ruining the first movie for me. I'm not going to say that the first movie was ruined for me. The first movie is still great. But what I was wrong about was the real intentions that Todd Phillips had in creating this movie. I'm just going to get this out of the way. Todd Phillips clearly didn't want to make this sequel. He tried to get the most money he possibly could out of the studio while doing the least amount of work, and he wasn't merely happy with disrespecting the studio executives. He set his sights on brutally disrespecting the very fans that loved the first movie so dearly. Here's some cold hard evidence to back up some of my claims. The original movie cost $65 million, which is honestly quite modest by today's standards, and as far as comic book movies are concerned, it's basically nothing. To put it in perspective, Avengers Infinity War cost nearly $300 million to make, and it grossed $2 billion. And Joker made $1 billion. That's huge gains. But how did Joker to Fall Off do? It cost $200 million. $200 million! That's the same as Deadpool 3. Think about how many incredible sets Deadpool 3 had. How many well-known actors, how many CGI shots, massive set pieces, extensive action sequences. And that's not even mentioning all the intellectual property licensing. And Joker 2 costs the same. And for what? The entire movie takes place in basically two sets built in studio, and every other scene was the exterior of both of those sets. That's literally a producer's wet dream, because it keeps costs so low. But the money didn't go into making the movie more interesting, or exciting, or mesmerizing. All the sets for the musical numbers were basic, static, and completely non-fantastical. But here's the cold hard truth of the matter. Todd Phillips never intended to make an interesting movie despite having all of the money in the world to do so. He helped the studio cash in so big on the first movie that they were dying for a sequel, so he demanded full creative and producing control, meaning that he could strong-arm them into shooting the movie in his hometown of LA, a choice which raised shooting costs by 20% due to taxes and permits and all that other crap. So not only did he want to shoot almost the entire movie in studio, because that would be the easiest way possible, he also didn't want to have to drive far away from his $35 million mansion to do so. And not only did he needlessly raise shooting costs out of laziness and personal convenience, he demanded he receive a front-end deal at $20 million, another $20 million for Joaquin Phoenix, and another $12 million to Lady Gaga. Those three people alone basically received the entire budget of Joker 1, which I honestly wouldn't even be that mad at if the movie was good. But goddamn man, this movie sucked big giant donkey balls. Where did all the rest of the money go? I'm genuinely baffled. Well, I can tell you where a bit of that went to. The goddamn music. Why is that, you ask? Because a movie that was a musical only had one single original song, and that was written by Lady Gaga, who already received $12 million just to be in the movie. So that means all of the other dozen or so songs sung had to be licensed out for use in the film. Which brings me to my next point, which I like to present as a question. If you've already made the movie as simple as possible to shoot by reducing the sets down to a couple inside a studio, how do you simplify your writing process? Easy. You get the characters to sing pre-existing songs literally anytime the movie is beginning to lead towards anything resembling interesting dialogue. That's it. Don't bother trying to write out the thought-provoking dialogue about a character literally on trial by the very society that is simultaneously idolizing and demonizing him. No. That would be difficult, and take effort, and time, and brain stuff. Nah. Why write dialogue or interesting scenes when you can fill a third of the runtime with barely topical songs? And hey, why bother making nice set pieces, or even getting your actors to perform, when you can just sit them in a room and get them to stare off into space while they barely whisper sing atonally? Like I said, I like musicals.
I said I am not gay.
But this isn't a musical. There were maybe 2 numbers where they actually danced and performed and tried to sing well, and the rest of the songs were just useless half-assed mutterings in between drags of cigarettes. The only purpose of making it a musical was to use old songs, simply so people had to write a lot less words. And to be honest, I'd still be okay with all that. Go ahead. Steal Hollywood's money while being a self-entitled lazy asshole who won't bother to deliver literally anything expected by the studio or the fans. But this isn't why I made this video. The real reason I made this video was to express the true intention of Todd Phillips. Todd Phillips didn't simply phone in a $200 million movie. He intentionally created a movie to dismantle the titular character in the most mean-spirited and brutal fashion I've ever seen, and it was truly mesmerizing to witness. There's a reason he refused to show it to test audiences. His movie is meant to insult and degrade and to mock the few fans that showed up to support it. But more importantly, the fans that collectively paid $1 billion to see the first movie. And Todd Phillips didn't even have enough of a spine to stand by his character assassination. There's no way around this. Todd Phillips is ashamed of Joker 1. He resents its success for all the reasons it was successful. He wants to distance himself from all of its deeper meanings, and he wants to put you on trial for ever enjoying something he views as amoral and vile. And I think this is where someone could look at the timeline of these movies in relation to Trump's 2 terms of presidency and draw some conclusions. Joker 1 was released in the middle of his first term, when the nation was clearly polarized for many reasons, and it seemed like Trump coming to office really brought a lot of these sentiments to the surface. Thusly, I think it's no coincidence that the first movie takes place during another socially tumultuous time, the Reagan administration. And although social and political unrest is the focal point of the first movie, I think that one of the reasons it did so well is that it rides the middle line of these two sides. In that sense, Arthur somehow represents both the Occupy movements and the black pill culture.
Life for a man is harder than life for a woman.
But the movie never identifies him as distinctly neoliberal or far-right. He's not really intentionally trying to make a point. He is simply a product of the conditions that he has been born into. And I think that's why the first movie was so beloved. Almost anyone on the political spectrum can relate to the struggle, pain, and frustration of Arthur, and his resulting actions are likened to a perverse power fantasy that so many of us understand, but mostly all of us disagree with. However, I think that whereas the first movie tries to give us some kind of hope, or at least some type of catharsis, the second movie shows us that Todd Phillips has seemingly grown repulsed by the political landscapes as of late, and does not want to participate in any type of discourse on the topics, but would rather flat out reject it in some kind of nihilistic rebellion against the very symbol he created in the first movie. You can draw your own conclusions, but the timeline of the first movie in relation to Trump's first term, and the undetermined re-election prior to the second, shouldn't be ignored. I'm not saying this movie is pro or anti-Trump, or that Trump is analogous to the Joker on trial in any definitive terms, but what I am saying is that this movie clearly rejects anyone that believes in Arthur Fleck as a symbol of anything more than a pathetic and powerless fool that should have never been revered and should certainly never be emulated or followed. You can probably draw your own conclusions. Anyway. Not only is Arthur shown to be a weak man, he is also a fool for ever believing in himself, and anyone else who related to his struggle is also a goddamn fool. That's why he's on trial, because the audience itself must witness him fail, and be completely dismantled, and humiliated, and broken, and defeated. That's fun. To give a quick synopsis of the trial, the crux of Arthur's defense attorney's argument is that Arthur has split personality disorder, and the Joker character was created as a response to his childhood trauma, and it was the Joker personality that committed the crimes, not Arthur, and therefore he should be deemed as unfit for trial, or at the very least, criminally insane, meaning he would end up in a psych ward rather than a penitentiary. It's a reasonable defense, and it's one that the attorney wholeheartedly believes, but Arthur is still struggling to decide what his own truth is. And in this sense, he's essentially regressed back to where he was at the beginning of the first movie. Dim-witted, soft-spoken, decrepit, bullied, and just generally powerless within his own story. It honestly sucks to see a character so broken and useless again, and really doesn't make a whole lot of sense considering where the character left off in the first movie. But again, I think that was Todd Phillips' intention. Show how intrinsically pathetic this character is, and take away every aspect that could be considered admirable or relatable to in any positive sense. And it's during this time that Arthur meets a version of Harley Quinn, played by Lady Gaga. It doesn't really matter that Todd Phillips changed up her character so drastically. I'm not going to bother to nitpick that because her character's personality and backstory doesn't serve much of a purpose to the vapid story being expressed. It's their dynamic that is important to the story. She's essentially reduced to a plot point that serves as a reason for Arthur to begin caring about life again. And yes, from a screenwriting perspective, it's about as superfluous and amateur as it sounds.
Derivative.
She starts singing to him, and in turn he starts singing, and they sing together, and he sings a bunch more, and it quickly becomes clear that every time he starts singing, the narrative is put on hold, because the singing represents Arthur fantasizing about escape and love, and most importantly, being the Joker. And admittedly, this method of representing Arthur's return to Joker through shared fantastical delusion represented by singing is interesting. But Todd Phillips isn't trying to lead us to any kind of fulfilling climax, like the conductor of an orchestra would lead the ballads to a satisfying crescendo. No. What he's trying to do is make the brutal theme of the movie that much clearer. The theme of delusion. Arthur is delusional for believing in Harley, and it's revealed she lied to him and manipulated him into falling for him because she's essentially just a spoiled rich fangirl creaming for the Joker persona, and he's a fool for believing in that as well. He's delusional for believing in himself, which is shown when he fires his lawyer and decides to represent himself, only to further make a fool of himself and easily lose the trial. And it's in this trial where he represents himself that we really see just how foolish and petty and pathetic this new version of Arthur is. This trial was supposed to be this movie's equivalent to the Murray scene of the last movie. It was supposed to be the culmination of all the pain and humiliation of Arthur building to such a breaking point that he transcends the sheepish beaten dog traits he's been taught and hindered by and delivers a powerful poignant message of personal countenance and triumphant defiance. But instead, he puts on a dumb southern accent.
Earlier this afternoon, you testified that you saw me stab Mr. Kleiman Minhuff in the neck a couple of times, correct?
No, Colonel Sanders, you're wrong.
And incomprehensibly destroys any chance of defending himself, proving how little awareness he has of the situation or his place within it. This is best evidence when he's cross-examining a witness from the first movie. The witness is a little person that he worked with and spared when he killed his other colleagues at his apartment. He mocks the guy's name.
You expect us to believe that your last name is Puddles? Puddles?
Mocks his height and just generally comes across as an insensitive, self-absorbed dumbass. All the while the actor playing Gary gives what is easily the best performance of the movie.
I still can't sleep, and I'm scared all the time. I felt so small. I was reminded how powerless I really am. Do you know what that feels like, Arthur? You were the only one at work who never made fun of me. You were the only one who was nice to me.
You got a flair for the dramatic. You are tugging at my heartstrings, little Gary.
And it's this contrast between Arthur's dickish ineptitude and Gary's grounded pain that really underlines the fact that the movie does not want you to like Arthur. This scene clearly expresses the sentiment that idolizing someone like Arthur is not only foolish, but cruel, and the consequences of his choices, although revered by some of the public, have had very real and brutal results on an individualistic level. But someone like Arthur can't see that, because he's so self-absorbed within his own feelings of grandeur, within his own delusional story. It's after this point that Arthur is raped by the guards. Yep, you heard that right. And one of the kinder fellow inmates who believed in Arthur and stood up for him is strangled to death by the guards, again hammering home the idea that Arthur only hurts those around him when he believes in himself. And then we got a long close-up shot of the death of Todd Phillips' Joker. And he delivers his tearful closing remarks, saying that the Joker is not a separate persona from himself, and it is not a symbol. He is simply a broken and pathetic and sick man who doesn't deserve reverence or redemption. Then, unsurprisingly, he's found guilty, but some of the fanatics break him out of jail and help him flee the scene. But during this car ride, they describe how the whole city is going to burn now that he's escaped. But he jumps out of the car and runs away. If it's not clear enough already, the fanatics represent the fans of the first Joker movie, who Todd Phillips seemingly now believes are themselves potentially dangerous degenerates, ready to follow a false idol into hell for their own juvenile delusions of rebellion. But Arthur runs to the iconic steps of the first movie, where he sees Harley, and for a second, I had hoped for some type of fun, cathartic prologue moment between the two characters. I don't know, have them dance on the steps or something. You know, like the poster? And just fade out, and at least let the characters live out some kind of ambiguous delusions of hope or joy, kind of like the ending of the first movie. But nope, Harley rejects them, saying she only cared about the fantasy of the Joker, and she just keeps singing to him, as he pleads for her to stop singing and just accept him. She's just another idiot singing praise for the character we all loved, and he's just a broken, sad idiot that gets dejected and then picked up by the cops and thrown back into jail. And hey, we can't just have it end on that absolute nadir of an ending, can we? Hell no. How about one of his fanboys kills him? 'Cause that's poetic justice. Or something. Right? Sure, Todd. Sure. You douchebag. And that's it. It's not some kind of triumphant representation of reconciliation or redemption. nor is it even a silly, fantastical, dark comedy musical. It's just a brutal, brutal character assassination, which leads me to my final thoughts on this weird-ass anti-movie, best summed up by a breakdown of the title. Joker, Folie à Deux.
What did you call it? Say it loud enough so everyone can hear. Come on, say it.
Folie à Deux. Folie à Deux being a psychological term that translates to the folly of two. A delusional fantasy shared by two or more people, which is validated by their own reciprocating mania. They share a lie, but their echo chamber reinforcement of this lie only strengthens the false reality they've locked themselves within. Honestly, a pretty clever name for the sequel, and at a surface level, this is clearly the shared delusional love of Harley and the Joker. But what Phillips attempts to do through the mean-spirited deconstruction of the character is essentially try to shift the focus onto the city of Gotham, showing how they are all delusional and cherishing the actions of their hero. Despite the fact that the first movie went to such great lengths to establish the Joker as a direct result of the brutal, dehumanizing machinations of the society he was raised in, the second movie basically tells us that relating to the pain and resulting actions of his character is not only a folly of delusion, it's downright stupid as hell. And in this regard, I think this is Todd Phillips extending the accusatory lens past the fictional citizens and towards the very audience that is paid to see the movie. It seems like he almost regrets giving any credence or respect to the Joker, and that we are analogous to the dumb and gullible spectators of the trial. The movie itself is putting the character of the Joker on trial, and by extension, we the audience are also on trial, and ourselves will be made a fool, as we witness just how dumb, cruel, and self-serving someone like Arthur really is. And the interesting aspect is that Phillips was the one who created this particular Joker in the first place. And he was the one who defended the character amidst the neo-leftist hysteria that said audiences wouldn't be able to handle such an incendiary character, and tried to boycott and cancel the movie before it even came out, because they feared it would result in people acting out in the same ways the character did. They feared that the character would be too relatable and inspire copycat murders, and perhaps even insurrectionism and orchestrated anarchy. And sure, if you really wanted to stretch, you could say that Trump was a Joker figure that incited relatable actions, but you'd have to be a complete fucking moron to believe that the motivation behind such mobilizations were a result of this movie, when in fact the truth is, those actions, and the first movie, were simply byproducts of a sickened and infuriated culture. For God's sakes, the first movie basically stole its entire plot, beats, and tone from 70s movies like Kings of Comedy and Taxi Driver. Those movies are 50 years old. These aren't new sentiments. These are deep-seated feelings of generationally inherited resentment that have only boiled and festered and grown through decades of oppression, destitution, dehumanization, and completely soul-crushing, spirit-shattering humiliation of people who are forced to fight each other over less and less as they're laughed at by those with more and more. And ironically, it seems that Todd Phillips would now rather ally himself with the haves than even try to entertain the have-nots. The first Joker movie wasn't a hit because it made its audiences murder people and attempt to topple regimes and force a new order. It was a hit because we all related deeply to the pain inherent in hopelessness and helplessness, and the fantasy of trying to believe in ourselves and of a future we could dictate, despite the fact we know it's probably a fool's errand to even hold on to that brittle shred of falsified dignity. We related to the pain. And in a sick, twisted way, it was enjoyable to watch somebody go through a struggle even worse than our own, and for them to at least feel like they could come out on top, even though we know how flawed and perverse that individual's self-satisfaction was in the end. And instead of just letting us enjoy that, Todd Phillips had to symbolically and literally have that character molested, humiliated, and killed in front of us. I can understand telling Hollywood to go fuck itself, but they asked him to make a sequel. They didn't force him, and he essentially stole $200 million from them while sabotaging a sequel to one of the most beloved and low-budget movies ever made. Which again, I'm not mad at all. But he didn't need to tell us to go fuck ourselves as well. I wouldn't have minded a simple movie with some silly musical numbers, but to call us all fools for relating to a character he created and then brutally destroying that character out of some kind of guilty spite was a bitch move. He didn't seem to mind making the goddamn Hangover movie 3 times, even though those 2 sequels sucked ass and were clearly just cash grabs.
What the heck is that?
I'm saying hello. We're dogs, remember?
But at least those movies tried to be entertaining and respect the fans. This was just an insult to our intelligence and our compassion, and hope he feels at least some semblance of shame for betraying his own art so spinelessly and intentionally. Boo this man, boo this movie, boo this goddamn world. I'm gonna go watch Blade.